Oh man, it's so dark back here. Sorry, I need some light, guys. Huh? Oh, thanks. Thank you. Recording. Start on Facebook. Yeah, let me start that. I'm glad you said that.
Yeah.
Perfect. I like to promote your podcast at the same time. So
Sure.
I'm constantly putting it in there.
Okay.
Perfect, it's working.
Okay, so you want to do the introduction?
Sure. Tonight we are presenting the unbiased look at the 12 state ballot initiatives, and we are facilitating it for Professor Jody Bama, a Fullerton College professor in our, I lost my train of thought again,
That's
political
okay.
science department. She's also the host of A Slice of Orange podcast, knowing your political views and introducing political people and views in the county. We are going to go over the ballot measures from the League of Women Voters in the North Orange County Division, I want to say. Thank you, Jody. Take it away.
Good. Okay. So we are going to be going over, there's 12 statewide ballot measures on the November 3rd ballot, although the reality is that our election day has turned into an election month. Ballots have been sent out yesterday, so they should be arriving this week. And one of the main missions of the League of Women Voters is voter education and making sure that voters are informed. The League of Women Voters is celebrating its 100th year. And so this is one of the things that we do. And California is one of 26 states that have these ballot measures, which make the ballot a little more confusing. So first, how do you, what are these ballot measures? California has initiatives that proposed laws can go on the ballot. We can change existing laws. We can change the California Constitution. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the Proposition Industrial Complex, the massive money-making function that gets these on the ballot, the folks with clipboards that stand outside of stores and on college campuses to collect signatures. How that will work in a pandemic reality, I'm not quite sure, but these were all put on the ballot before that happened. So 600, 900,000 signatures have to be collected. So before a single ad is made, you're already talking about millions of dollars. And so one of the things you want to think about before you vote for anything is, why is some group, why is some person, why is some organization willing to spend millions of dollars to get these on the ballot and then spend tens and hundreds of millions of dollars on ads to try to convince you. So be skeptical of these propositions as we go through. It takes 50% plus one to get a yes for them to pass. How to decide? There's a number of issues that you want to look at. Is it a simple or complex issue? There are some of these propositions, Proposition 14, Proposition 18, super simple. One question, yes or no. There are others like Proposition 20 that's multi-layered and complex. And one of the reasons I bring that up is because you have to vote for the entire proposition, and an initiative can only be changed by another initiative. So we often get these unintended consequences. So you want to be careful before you vote for a proposition that might end up needing to be reformed. Whether it's a constitution or a statute is something to consider. Who's for it? Who's against it? How are we going to pay for it? And then the merits of the proposition itself. Is it something good, and do I agree with all of it? Because again, the whole thing is going to pass. So it's not that you can say, oh, I like part 1 and 2, but I don't like part 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Then vote against it and hope that somebody comes up with another initiative, or the California legislature could pass a law dealing with it. So a lot of times these initiatives are put on because people want things, and they will wrap them in very pretty shiny paper to try to get you to vote for it. And it might be better to vote against those things. So these are the 12 that we're going to go through, and I'm going to take a break after each 4 to answer questions. If you want to put them in the chat, I can answer them, but it'll sort of break up. So we'll go through props 14, 15, 16, and 17, and then we'll take questions on those. If you have questions, just put it in the chat and we'll get to those. Something else to think about is the League of Women Voters and my podcast, A Slice of Orange, are sponsoring a student video contest. Basically, we do these proposition sessions to try to teach people what the ballot measures are all about, but what we want to do is teach students how to do that research for themselves. Even those who are too young to vote can figure out how the state of California ballot measures work. And so we're sponsoring a video contest with a $100 cash prize for each of the 12 state measures. And then another category for the local measures that will go over. Fullerton and La Habra, Cypress, and a couple of other cities have local measures that are on the ballot as well. And then also just how to be an informed voter. The League of Women Voters has a website called Voter's Edge that can help you figure out who the candidates are on your ballot, what the statewide ballot measures are, what the local measures are. And so encourage teachers, students, parents to get those students to enter. And all that information is on the League of Women Voters website. And students can work as a group, they can work alone, and they just do short videos explaining these ballot measures. It's kind of fun to see what the students are coming up with. So bonds, Prop 14 is a bond. What are bonds? Why are bonds used? How much does it cost? So bonds are a form of long-term borrowing that the state uses to raise money for large projects. The state sells bonds to investors, and the large project, the state then repays it with interest out of the general obligation fund. So if you want to look at kind of where we are, these are the bonds that are sold before. This is Prop 14, authorized but not sold, and this is the bond on the November 2020 ballot, because there's only one, and so this is out through 2026. Hard to project past that because a lot of it depends on the repayment, depends on the interest rates. When interest rates are relatively low, it's fairly cheap to borrow money. When in doubt, leave it blank. This is advice that I often give to my students. There's no penalty for leaving offices or propositions blank. So if you're still confused by the end of this, you can leave it blank and just vote for what you know. Same advice on candidates. Vote for what you know. Get to know your local candidates. Watch the forums that League of Women Voters and other groups put on. Get to know your candidates and vote for them. But when you don't know in midterm elections when we're voting for 7, 8 offices in the plural executive, when you have to decide who the governor and the lieutenant governor and the superintendent of public instruction and the treasurer and the controller and the board of equalization and the attorney general and the secretary of state. If you don't know, leave it blank, because there are often consequences to the elections, and you want to make sure that people who understand who these people are and what they're voting for. Last caution is that often these initiatives are like sledgehammers, and the problem that we have needs a scalpel. And you don't have that option. You don't have the option to say, I really want something to change and we'll just roll the dice. There are often serious unintended consequences to these initiatives. The voters are passing laws, and it can only be changed with another initiative. So we're stuck with those unintended consequences in a way that we're not when the California legislature takes up an issue. When the California legislature passes a law and something's wrong, they can just go back and fix it, add an amendment, add a rider, and it can be fixed relatively easily. This starts the clock all over again, and we have to have another initiative. So let's get started. Prop 14, like I said, and this is from the League of Women Voters Easy Guide. If you watch the longer session that we did earlier today for the League of Women Voters, did a session that I'll put the YouTube chat. It has more information. I just want to go through and answer any questions that people have. So Prop 14 is a bond measure. And if it sounds familiar that we had a stem cell, we did. Prop 71 was a $3 billion bond for stem cell research. It passed. It's been successful. We're almost out of money because we issued all of that $3 billion in grants for stem cell research. And now we want to do it again with a $5.5 billion bond. So simple and straightforward. People who are for it, you'll see here, the people who are for it say that stem cell bonds have led to new medical research, and that should continue. The people who are against it say we shouldn't be spending that money. So straightforward, if you support stem cell research being funded through this bond, you would vote yes on Prop 14. If you're opposed to that, you would vote against it. Prop 15. You've probably seen a lot of advertising for Prop 15. The way it is now, this goes back to California's original proposition, Prop 13 in 1978, which changed the way we allocate property tax. Anytime we want to change it, it's a huge, massive deal. There's a lot of fear about changing Prop 13. This is simply to split the roles and have residential and agricultural property stay under the Prop 13 taxes, which is basically to limit the increases on property taxes to no more than 2%. Increase. And then Prop 15 would say commercial property is going to be treated differently. So we call this what a split roll, which is to say that commercial property is going to be treated differently. One of the problems that people believe is a consequence of Prop 13 is that residential and commercial property were treated the same. True. Treated the same under Prop 13. This would treat them differently. And one of the reasons people want them to be treated differently is because businesses usually don't sell property. And so while houses since 1950 have been, sold and bought and sold and bought and reassessed for property taxes, many times Disneyland has not. And Disneyland is likely never to be sold. And so they are paying artificially low property taxes based on that Prop 13 restriction. The people who are for this say, and there are some exemptions. If commercial property is less than $3 million, it wouldn't be affected. The property taxes would go to local governments and to the schools. It's one of the reasons that the schools and local governments are pushing so hard for this to be passed. You see a lot of ads for communities and schools because that's where the tax increase would come. And it is estimated that it would be $6.5 billion to $11.5 billion more in property taxes. It doesn't start right away. It wouldn't start until 2023, but at that point, the taxes would go up. The people who support it say wealthy companies and business property owners should be paying more based on what their holdings are actually worth. And people who are against it say that raising taxes would increase the cost on everything because the commercial owners would pass that cost down. So that's Prop 15. Prop 16 is to redo another initiative. In 1996, California voters were faced with Proposition 209, and they passed it banning affirmative action. Prop 16 would repeal Prop 209 and say that schools, colleges, jobs can all use affirmative action as one of the decision makers. They don't have to, it's not forced. There's no such thing as quotas included in this, but it would just allow race, sex, color, ethnicity, and the country that they come from to be a factor in making those decisions. There's no direct cost to this. The legislative analyst looks at all of these propositions to determine what the cost would be. There's no cost really associated with this. People who support it say that it will help women and people of color while fighting against long-standing patterns of discrimination. And the people who are against it say that it treats people unequally to consider those factors when deciding who gets into college or a job. Prop 17, a fairly straightforward. It's about voting rights. This one and Prop 18 are both about voting rights. Prop 17 is that people on parole could vote. So currently in the state of California, we're one of 3 states that says that even though you've served your time for a felony, if you are on parole, you cannot vote. Some states, and there's a whole spectrum, Iowa doesn't let people who have committed a felony ever vote again. Other states, Maine lets you vote while you're in prison for a felony. So there's a whole spectrum of voting rights based on felony convictions. California says that while you are in prison and while on parole, you are not allowed to vote. This would say as soon as you are on parole, you can regain your voting rights. It's a negligible number of people who would likely vote as a result, but we would then have to change and allow them to vote. And so there's negligible costs, hundreds of thousands of dollars to change the voting systems. People who support Prop 17 say people on parole pay taxes, they should be allowed to vote, they've served their time, this will help them rejoin society. People who are against it say parole is a time for serious and violent criminals to prove that they've changed, and once they're done with parole, they can have the right to vote. So that's the first 4, and let's take a break and go to the chat if anybody has any questions about Props 14, 15, 16, and 17. I'm happy to answer them.
Okay, I have one. I just got to type it. Can I just say it instead of type it? You can
just say it.
Yeah, okay. So I have a question on the last one you just did, Prop 17.
Yep.
Who is against this? I mean, who would be the supporters that are against allowing people to start over, to have a chance when they first get out? It gives them some kind of purpose and dignity. So who's fighting this?
So actually, that's a good question. And let me actually set up Ballotpedia, because it's a great way to look and see anything you want. Ballotpedia is amazing, and you can use it for all your research. So if you go to Ballotpedia and type in California 2020 ballot propositions,
okay,
it will go to Prop 17.
Oh, I like this.
And it gives you everything. So it says what it is, it says the overview, it gives you the text of the measure, it gives you everybody who's for it. So all these folks are for it. You'll notice a lot of Democratic legislators, the California Democratic Party, ACLU of Northern California. The reasons why they're for it, so Kevin McCarty is going to give you a statement, the official arguments in the voter guide, so you don't have to go back to your voter guide, you can just look right here. The opponents, one person, Jim Nielsen, a state senator, and the Election Integrity Project, which is also going to come up in Prop 18. They're an organization that exists in a number of states. One of the things I really like about Ballotpedia is it tells you how much people are spending. So the group that is spending the most money on this, and they're not spending very much for California, $500,000 is paltry compared to Prop 22, where they're spending, $200 million. You can see the states. So these are the states that we're one of 3 of these little light green states. 18 other states restore voting rights for people convicted of felonies after they complete their prison sentence. So we would not be the first or the only. So you can kind of find out other things. And then these are other election policy on the ballot in 2020 in other states, what other states are considering. And then you can see, yeah, all of that.
Yeah, I like how it shows how much people are paying for this and what they're doing. But I just wondered who would oppose it. It didn't surprise
Almost
me just
nobody.
one.
Almost nobody.
And he's spending no money on the opposition of it.
Right. There will clearly be lots of people who vote against it. It will not be a 99% to 1, but a lot of people support it. And I can't imagine a single election where people on parole would be the majority and deciding elections, right? It's a fairly small number. So there's a question in the chat for Prop 15. People who are against it say it will hurt small businesses. Would that because rent prices would or could go up? Is there another way small businesses could be affected? So first of all, small businesses are always the reason that people are going to say that they're opposed to something. Sometimes it's legitimate and sometimes it isn't. It's kind of the social, the business equivalent of what we call what about the children argument, which, always pulls on the emotional heartstrings, even when it's not particularly true. So in this case, small businesses are by legislation protected from this. However, if you are a small business renting in a property that would have their rent go up, you could see that could be passed down to you. On some level, rents are going to be determined by market, and you're not going to be able to just increase rent because you want to. People will move to other places, but there is the very real economic reality that when large businesses have their costs go up, that they pass that on to the consumer and to the renter. So it is possible. But by direct legislation, Prop 15 does not affect small businesses. Other questions on 14, 15, 16, and 17? If you think of something later, we can come back, but it's nice to do it when it's fresh in people's minds. Yeah, I'll totally do the link. There you go. Okay, so let me, I have to go back. I have to share my screen first before I set my screen. Okay, so 18, super simple. Prop 18 is to allow some 17-year-olds to vote in the primary election. So if you are 17 years old in March, you don't get to vote in the primary for the general election. This would change that and say that as long as you are going to be 18 by the general election, so on this cycle by November 3rd, you would get to vote in the March primary and any special elections. If there was a special election for Congress in the summer, you would be able to vote for that. So again, very straightforward, not a lot of controversy. There are some people who are opposed to it because they believe that 17-year-olds would be under the influence of teachers and parents, which I sometimes question whether or not those people have met 17-year-olds, because it doesn't seem like at least my teenagers, are unduly influenced by anything I say. But okay. A lot of people like this idea. And in fact, there's kind of a movement to lower the voting age and infuse civic education, right? So that the idea is that you would be working with, and the primary election is a nice time to kind of start the process, because the primary election is where you nominate for the political party, or in California, the top 2 vote getters to advance to the November election. And so to kind of allow 17-year-olds who are going to be 18 and participating in that general election to kind of get in on the primary election is good. In Orange County, we have races that are not on the general a ballot. The Orange County Board of Education was decided in March. The Orange County Board of Supervisors for Don Wagner was decided in March. Only the Sergio Contreras Andrew Doe race had to go to a runoff in November. There are a lot of races that are decided in the primary election. And so there is the question of whether or not we should be allowing that. Again, we're not the only state that's done this. There are 17 other states that have allowed it. And so it's a fairly straightforward measure. If you think that 17-year-olds should be voting in the primary election, you vote yes on Prop 18. If you don't, you don't. Prop 19. So Prop 19 is a little bit confusing. I'm going to grab my notes because it's a little more complex. But basically, it's a change to property tax. So again, we're changing how property taxes are assessed. You have to put it on the ballot if you want to change it because it was originally on the ballot. And this would actually affect two different propositions, Prop 13 and Prop 90 that passed in 1988, which says that special groups, seniors and the disabled, could keep their Prop 13 limitation on how fast their property tax goes up if they move. And the incentive here is to try to get seniors to move, because if you are going to pay ridiculously high property taxes if you move, but keep your property taxes if you stay, well, you're not going to move. So this actually opens up family homes as people downsize or move to a retirement community, to a condo, or to a massively large house. Under Prop 90, you could only move within your own county or a reciprocal county. This would open it up statewide so that you could move not once, but 3 times. And then also include victims of disasters. So natural disasters, wildfires. If you lost your home and you said, it's not good to live in the forest in California when the fire keeps coming, and so we're going to move to another part of the state, you could then keep your property tax. I don't know how many people will do that. Most people rebuild in the same location, but it's possible under this Prop 19 to allow that. Another thing it does is kind of close the loophole. So under Prop 90, you could inherit a house and not have it be reassessed. That's good if it's a family home. You don't want to punish people because of a death. However, the Los Angeles Times did an article on the large number of properties that were not reassessed, that weren't being used as primary residences. So it wasn't the family home that the children or the grandkids were living in, they were renting it out. And the Bridges family ended up on the front page of the Los Angeles Times because Lloyd Bridges bought his house in Malibu in the 1950s for a ridiculously low amount. And so even with the 2% increases, the property tax on that house was still less than $6,000 a year. And none of the Bridges kids, Jeff and Bo, weren't living in the house. They were renting it out, and a monthly rental in Malibu goes for about $16,000 a month.
Oh my God.
So turns out a whole bunch of people were doing that. Incredibly wealthy people were renting out the family homes because they could get far more from rentals, and the property taxes were relatively low. So this would close that loophole and say, if you're not using it as a primary residence, we don't want to kick you out of your house, but if you're not using it as a primary residence, then it has to be reassessed. So that is part of where that increased taxes would come from, tens of millions of dollars in the first years. Now, it's possible that people would sell the houses because the property taxes would be high. We don't know how laws change behavior, but the reassessment would then come with the sale. So one way or another, either it would be reassessed because people aren't living there, or it would be reassessed because the house was sold. So people who support this say that people shouldn't have to pay higher property taxes if they lose their homes in a disaster. That's one of the changes, and that it protects older homeowners. And creates new opportunities for people to rent. People who are against it say it's a tax increase, and we don't want tax increases. The folks who are talking about not being able to afford to pay taxes on an inherited family home, again, we're allowing people who are using it as a primary residence to use it, but that's the argument against it. So that's Prop 19. Prop 20. Prop 20 is super complicated. So
That's 19.
Prop 20, buckle up. This gets a little in the weeds. So this is going to revise and change 3 laws. So we're going to change AB 109, Prop 47, and Prop 57, which all deal with changes to criminal justice. So see how quickly we're dealing with having to change initiatives with another initiatives when people think we need to change the initiatives, because you can only change an initiative with another initiative. Whew. So the simple version is that it adds crimes to the list of violent felonies in which early parole is restricted. It recategorizes some crimes. And we have this term wobbler, which is a crime that can go either in a misdemeanor or a felony, depending on the severity of the crime. Creates a whole bunch of those. And it requires DNA collection for certain misdemeanors. So we're changing Prop 47, we're changing Prop 57. And this part, that people convicted of stealing items worth $250 to $950 could be sent up to jail for 3 years, is a big reason of why the grocery stores are spending so much money. Albertsons threw in $100,000 to get this to pass. Ralph's threw in $100,000. Grocery stores tend not to have the same shoplifting deterrents that, metal detectors and those sorts of things. They don't have, shoplifting detectors on their, like Target has those sorts of things. The shoplifting that is currently just not being prosecuted is hitting grocery stores hard, which is why they are in support of this. However, there are some pretty big conservative newspapers that are opposed to it, including the Orange County Register, who says, yeah, we think there are problems with criminal justice, but this is not the solution. So it's a little bit sticky because there's so many different things in here, and you only get to vote all of it or none of it. I would encourage you to look at the editorials. The Bakersfield Californian says this is not the right solution. The Orange County Register says there are some major problems with it. So we already have very tough laws, and I think that there's a lot of people who are really wary of this particular solution. Not that we don't need a solution, not that we don't need a fix for some of these problems. And I think we absolutely need to be listening to the grocery stores of how do we help them. But this might not be the best solution. So I encourage you to look further into Prop 20. Prop 21 is housing and rent control. If this sounds familiar to you, it is. 2018, we had Prop 10, which, millions and millions of dollars was spent to defeat it, and it won. A lot of times people will come back to the voters and say, okay, well, you didn't like that version, but now we've made some nifty changes. So one of the changes that they made is that for rent control to be in effect, the building has to be more than 15 years old.
Is Julie asleep?
And, oh, Laura, if you want to mute, you can. So it has to be 15 years old, and it exempts people who only have 1 or 2 properties. So you have to have more than 3 properties to be affected by this. And state law requires that landlords make a profit. So this does not, Prop 21 does not actually do anything about rent control. It just repeals Costa-Hawkins, which prohibited rent control from being enacted. So what 21 does is say local governments can consider rent control. It doesn't actually, if Prop 21 passes, rent control is not guaranteed. It would simply allow local governments to consider rent control. So the people who are for this say that rent control helps families. stay in their homes. It's fair by allowing landlords a profit. People who are against it say that it will make housing less available and less affordable because landlords might not be willing to rent to people. So, questions about those four?
Yes.
18, 19, 20, and 21. So, yeah, this would allow someone who was 18 in June be able to, somebody who turned 18 anytime between March and November to vote in the March primary. Yeah. Has Prop 19 been on the ballot before? So kind of, in that it changes Prop 90, but it hasn't been on the ballot recently. Does it make sense to move older adults to pay Prop? So the idea is that seniors start at 55. So as that number gets closer and closer to my own age, you start to realize that you have a lot of years where you are considered a senior. And so allowing people to move as their lifestyle changes and keep that reduced property tax as your income becomes fixed as you retire kind of makes sense to incentivize that. So, is it a giveaway to seniors? I don't think it is, because I think that the behavior that we've seen before we allowed that is that seniors simply will stay in a house that is far too big for them.
It's too difficult to move. It's very difficult and expensive to move. A lot of them are like, we don't want to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so the other advantage is that so if you can leave the family house, as many people who have the means to do, to your children and have them turn it into the family house, and then you move to a condo or a retirement community, but you don't have to pay the higher property tax, you get to keep your reduced property tax, that makes that switch a lot easier. But behavior, there's a lot of factors involved. On Prop 20, if we vote no, they would be forced to go back to the drawing board. Yeah, that's, whether they will or not, I don't think that the folks who want Prop 20 would simply give up. And we see kind of some repeats that we see. That is something that has to be on the ballot. Changes to Prop 47 and 57 would have to be approved by the voters. However, we see propositions come back all the time where they try to fix something to make it more palatable. And it is dangerous to simply vote for whatever they come up with on the first time, because there are often unintended consequences. So Prop 21, could the landlord raise the rent to start out?
Does that make sense? Like they would evict more people so they could raise the rent and get somebody else in there, and evictions would be higher, because if you couldn't raise, it's rent control. Wouldn't have a lease, it's month to month, they could get you out, and then they could say, oh, we just raised the rent before you rented it again.
Yeah, it would depend on how the rent control proposals are that's up for the local communities to decide, right? There's always that fear, but that's what planning commissions in cities are for. That's what county planning needs to take into consideration. And there is the reality that when we price people out of our communities, there are pretty serious consequences.
No renters.
So, yeah.
Okay.
Prop 19, just want to confirm that if you buy a property for greater than the property that you sell, you can retain the original property base. Kind of. So if you buy a more expensive property as a senior, because originally Prop 90, we just assumed everyone would be downsizing, not realizing that not everybody wants to downsize, they want to change. And so if the new property exceeds the old property by more than $1 million, then you're reassessed on that difference. All right, other questions on those? I think we got all the questions in the chat. Okay, Let's go back and talk about 22. So if you haven't seen an ad for Prop 22, you are clearly living off the grid because it is the most expensive initiative in California state history, with Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, Grubhub, and a couple of others paying about $200 million for ads. So basically what happened, the California legislature passed AB 5, which sets a test for who can be an independent contractor. And it very clearly defined that drivers for app-based driving companies are employees. The Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash immediately threw $30 million into a campaign account and said, we are going to defeat this, or, and this is a threat, we move out of the state of California and we will no longer do business here because we cannot afford to treat our employees as employees. There's a couple of other industries that have gotten an exemption. Newspaper journalists that are writing articles are now exempt from this. There's a couple of other industries that have said we can't afford to treat these people who are clearly employees as employees, and they've gotten an exemption. And so the app-based companies are pleading to the voters to do or undo what the legislature did. So under AB 5, drivers for companies that are app-based driving and delivery companies clearly are employees. Prop 22 are these companies asking the voters to say, please change the law to make that not true. So that's what Prop 22 is. The companies themselves wrote Prop 22. And so as an incentive to try to get voters to say, okay, well, we'll allow that, they have included regulations on themselves. And so they have to pay drivers 20% more than the local minimum wage for time spent driving, not for time spent waiting, but for time spent driving. They would have to help pay health insurance costs for contractors who drive more than 15 hours per week. They would limit cities and counties from putting additional rules on those companies. The rules would have to be statewide. They would pay for workers' comp through Prop 22, through medical costs that they don't currently have to do for an independent contractor. They have sexual harassment training. They have zero tolerance rules for drunk driving, those kinds of things. And it allows the drivers to work for more than one company. As an employee, you could be limited to only working for one company. And so a number of drivers, people who work for these companies, have been featured in the ads of saying that we like the flexibility of these jobs and we would support Prop 22. So the people who are for it say that rideshare and delivery drivers want to work as independent contractors and not as employees. Forcing companies to hire drivers and employees would get rid of hundreds of thousands of jobs. And in fact, if the threat is true that these companies would shut down operation in California, and there's no reason to believe that that is not a true threat. These companies are international companies, and they clearly want to make sure that other states, those 26 other states that have initiatives, do not do the same thing because it would hurt their financial viability. People who are against Prop 22 say that rideshare and delivery companies don't want to pay drivers basic benefits, that treating drivers as employees will make sure that they get paid sick leave and unemployment benefits. So it's just whether or not you support the companies or the people who believe that the companies should be treating them as employees. So that's Prop 22. Prop 23. Prop 23 is another redo for kidney dialysis clinics. Prop 23 is an example of initiatives that I hate, and I'm just going to throw in my personal opinion here and take it for what it's worth. This is one of those things that I look at and I say, there is absolutely no reason why I as a voter should be this invested in discovering what dialysis clinics should do. And to try to remain non-biased as I go over Prop 23, I'll use another example from a previous proposition, which was the chicken cages, Prop 22, that asked voters to decide how big a chicken cage should be. I have no idea how big a chicken cage should be. And I elect people to represent me in the California legislature whose job it is to figure these things out and regulate all forms of businesses and industry. I don't know how big a chicken cage should be. And the unintended consequence of California voters deciding how big a chicken cage should be is that California lost almost all of the egg farmers as they moved out of state because they did not want to pay for the new cages that were mandated by the voters. And so now most eggs in the state of California are not California based. They are either cage free, which is one of the proposals, or they are imported from other countries and other states that don't have what we passed as Prop 2. So we're going to learn about kidney dialysis. So this is a redo of another initiative, Prop 5 or Prop 8, that was on the ballot in 2018 that the union that wants to unionize the dialysis clinics is getting the for-profit companies to spend lots of money on these initiatives, and they are. And a number of these provisions that sound good are duplicative. So the way it is now that we have these dialysis clinics, they're provided by licensed dialysis clinics by the state of California. A person's personal doctor has to visit them at least once a month at the clinic. Dialysis treatment is often paid for by Medicare, Medi-Cal, or private insurance. And obviously private insurance pays more than the set rate of Medicare and Medi-Cal. What Prop 23 would change is that it would require dialysis clinics to have a doctor present during all treatment hours. So because most dialysis is, 3 times a week for 4 hours, dialysis clinics tend to be open early and late to allow people to have those sessions. All dialysis clinics in the state of California have to have a medical director that visits and ensures that the clinic is meeting all of the licenses. So this, having a doctor present, would greatly reduce the hours of the dialysis clinics or greatly increase the cost to have a doctor present at all times. The clinics would have to report any dialysis-related infections to the state every 3 months. There are already requirements of reporting, and that would be very simple to have the legislature change that if it's not sufficient. Clinics would need permission from the state before closing or reducing services. Clinics could not discriminate against clients based on insurance on how they're paying for treatment. Again, these are very simple to put into the regulatory license agreements in the state of California, but it's coming to us on the initiative as a fight between the union and the clinics. The Bay Area has nonprofit dialysis clinics that are, not involved in this fight that would be affected by this. Clearly, the companies themselves would change their behavior based on this new restriction. A lot of people who are opposed to this believe that a lot of dialysis clinics would close, particularly in rural areas, to consolidate those clinics to have the doctor who is currently visiting multiple clinics during a week at one clinic. And so those dialysis patients would either have to travel a far distance or go to the hospital. People who are for it say that it protects patients in rural communities. People who are against it say that people in rural communities who would have less access. So Proposition 23 is one of those things that, in my opinion, just is not something that the voters should be deciding on. But here it is because you collect signatures. And so if you pay enough money, you can get it on the ballot and you can collect signatures and put it there. So there's Prop 23. Prop 24, changes to consumer privacy laws. This is also somewhat duplicative to what we already have. One guy is funding this, Alistair McTaggart, who got the California Consumer Privacy Act passed through the legislature, which allows consumers to find out what data companies are collecting about them, tells a business to stop selling the personal data and have the data removed from a company's files. That's already state law. What Prop 24 would do is make it almost impossible to change that law by having the voters pass an initiative that could only be changed by another initiative. So almost all of this is duplicative to what the California Consumer Privacy Act already says. And it allows some breaks for larger companies, which is why those big companies aren't spending millions and millions of dollars against it. Sometimes when you look at who's spending money, the question is, why isn't this something that large tech firms are spending a lot of money if it's oh so great for the people and oh so terrible for the companies? The reason, according to editorial boards, and you can look them up on Ballotpedia, is because there are some power given to the tech firms in this initiative as a way to get them to not stand against it. So what Prop 24 would do is give people increased power over their personal data. You would have to contact the companies individually. It doesn't have a blanket limitation on the privacy issues. The state agency would have to oversee this. We already have a state agency set up in the California Consumer Privacy Act. So people who are for it say we need to stop tech companies from tracking everything we do online. People who are against it say Prop 24 is just not the vehicle to do that. And consumers should not have to fill out paperwork and send forms to every tech company to have their data protected. So that is Prop 24. Prop 25, our last one. You've made it to the end. Prop 25 is yes or no on getting rid of cash bail. So this is what we call a referendum. The California legislature passed a law that ended cash bail in the state of California, replacing it with a risk assessment procedure. And so instead of deciding whether or not you're out on bail by your ability to pay, this would assess the risk based on the severity of the crime and your likelihood to return. So people who were opposed to it gathered signatures to veto this law that was passed and signed by the governor. And so Prop 25 comes to us to try to ask the people whether or not they really like this or not. So what Prop 25 would do is, if you vote yes, you would be affirming what the legislature did, get rid of the bail system, and allow the new state law to go into effect. So people charged with less serious crimes would be released before trial. If judges decide through this risk assessment that more serious crimes should be kept in jail, they would be kept in jail. Voting no would keep what we had before, would keep the cash bail system. The folks who are most opposed to this are the financial beneficiaries of the cash bail system that are making money from cash bail, and they're spending millions of dollars to try to get people to vote against this. People who support it say the current system is unfair. You can't afford bail, but you have to stay in jail. That's expensive. Jail is very expensive, and the court system is backed up. So people spend a lot of time in jail only to be found that they are not guilty. And the decisions would be based on public safety, not the person's ability to pay. So questions? Let's see, where are we on this? Are grocery stores exempt from this? Grocery stores, so
The essential,
from Prop 22.
right.
So I'm not actually sure because they are not spending money on it, so I can't exactly tell. But I believe that how grocery stores employ drivers, I'm not sure if they're officially employees or if they're independent contractors in the same way. It's not app-based in the same way. It's usually from the grocery store itself. It would certainly treat the drivers of Instacart
Right.
that go through an app that way. Deborah Stout says, with 12 propositions, how many will pass? Oh, I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. Is there a minimum number of votes needed for it to pass? All of them are just simple majorities. There are no, for a local tax increase, you need more than 50%, you need 55% for a school bond. These are all simple majority. So on election night, they're statewide. So if you're looking at ocvote.com for the vote results, don't, because Orange County often votes differently from the entire state. And there are a whole bunch of people voting in the Bay Area and Los Angeles who might vote differently from Orange County. So yeah, you have to look at the Secretary of State's website for the election results on statewide measures. And it may be a couple days before we know the results of all of them. Some of them will be pretty fast. What would be the main reason for doctors being at the clinic every day? I'm not really sure. The California Medical Association does not believe that there is a legitimate reason to have a doctor on site every day. So I'm not sure. Prop 22, supporters have spent over $180 million to get this passed. How much would they spend treating people as employees? I don't know. I often have that same reaction to, Jeff Bezos of, hey, could you make less than $13 million today and treat your employees better so that I feel less guilty about ordering things off of Amazon? Maybe. Or I could, get my routine shipment in 3 days rather than the same day if you gave them a break to go to the bathroom, because I don't need everything immediately. Those are always my concerns. I don't know that the best way to legislate that is through the initiative process, however. That's what we're faced with. It's on the ballot, and so we have to make that decision. But the app-based companies that are spending all this money are fighting this battle in California because they do not want to have this happen in other states. So I think we should take them seriously when they say they will shut down in California. I think they will use this as a battle that they have to win. Now, why they don't pay people better, I don't know. But I do think that we should take them seriously. And those companies are headquartered in California. And so them leaving would have devastating financial effect. They have more economic profits than GM, Ford, and Chrysler. So this is like Detroit saying goodbye car industry. It would be devastating to the California budget at a time when California has a $55 billion deficit. So I have no reason to doubt that they would follow through on their threat. Are grocery stores hiring their own drivers? Yeah, so some of them do. I have never ordered delivery through the grocery store itself, but I believe that that is possible. And so that would be a different kind of driver. So let me just, if there aren't any other questions on those, I'll just finish up a little bit about how to vote and questions about voting in general. And the local measures. So if you live in Cypress, Costa Mesa, Fullerton, Laguna Woods, La Habra, there are local measures. Fullerton has two, one on a tax increase for sales tax to pay for street repair and emergency response, and then another of whether or not to ban fireworks. Fullerton allowed fireworks a few years back, and if you were around on the 4th of July, it felt like Disneyland just handed out to-go bags, and it looked like they were all illegal fireworks. Certainly not safe and sane lighting up the sky. But this is whether or not safe and sane fireworks would be banned. La Habra has two, one on cannabis business tax and another on the open spaces. Los Alamitos, Newport Beach, Orange has an open space measure. San Clemente, Tustin, and Westminster have. Most of these can be found on the city websites. If you live in those cities, you can find that information on the city websites and in your voter guide. So this is a vote by mail. Every voter will be mailed and should be arriving soon. They were mailed out on Monday. And if you aren't following the Registrar of Voters, Neil Kelly's social media, he has some really, really great and informative videos about the vote centers. They print their own ballots in Orange County. We have one of the best Registrar of Voters in the entire state, if not the entire country. I don't want to tell too many people that because I don't want somebody to steal him away. But we really do have an incredible Registrar of Voters. And I think that whole office, anybody who's ever run for office, wow, they are incredibly helpful in helping people as candidates and campaigns. So everybody's going to get a ballot, and you can drop it off in the ballot box. all over the county. You can drop it off in any secure drop-off ballot box. Vote centers are going to be open. If you really want to vote in person, you can. If you have any problem, if you don't get your ballot, you can go to a vote center. If you lose your ballot, you can go to a vote center. If you lost your ballot, you can go to a vote center. October 30th through November 2nd, they're open from 8 to 8 every day. On election day, they're open even earlier, 7 a.m. And you can go in person. You have to wear a mask. There are precautions everywhere. There's a video where they walk you through the whole process. And you can vote in person if that is your preference. You can go anywhere in the county. The Honda Center is going to be a mega voting center. And they're going to have that set up. Anywhere in the county, they will print your ballot. So you will be voting on everything that you would have been voting on for your address. Computers are amazing and wonderful, and they just pull that up. Voters Edge. The League of Women Voters has a website called the Voters Edge. You can type in your address and it will tell you your ballot, particularly as cities go to districts and you're driving around the town and you say, oh, do I have a school board race? Do I have a city council race? I should probably figure that out. Go to Voters Edge. They'll tell you if you do, because as we go to districts, you will only be voting for a city council member every 4 years. And so one election you won't have a candidate, another election you will. The League of Women Voters has candidate forums for Placentia School Board, Placentia City Council, that you can get to know your candidates. Fullerton candidate forum was just done. We don't have any school board elections in Fullerton because we had uncontested ballots, but you can find all of that out at Voters Edge, and it's kind of a one-stop shop. All the candidate information is there, and you can find out information. Lots of resources to find out more, and once I stop sharing, I'll throw these all in the chat for you. But the slides that I've been showing you are directly from the Easy Voter Guide from the League of Women Voters that puts everything in a nice package for you to keep things Voters Edge for California. If you're interested more in campaign finance, of who's funding the campaigns, pro and con, you can look at the Secretary of State's website, Secretary of State, California.gov, campaign lobbying. Although I have to be honest, Ballotpedia is so much easier to look up for any particular initiative that you're interested in. So I really encourage you to look there. And let me stop sharing and I will copy these over. Oh, I gotta do that. Oh. And there we go. Okay. So let me get you the Easy Voter Guide in the chat, the Voters Edge. Oh, I just sent that to somebody privately. I got to send it to somebody. Let me send this. And let me send you Ballotpedia again. If you want the whole campaign finance, the Secretary of State keeps track of it all. There you go. And the voter guide. Any questions you have. That should have been mailed to all registered voters, but just in case, you can get it online. So any questions? Yeah, we are incredibly lucky. Our voting system is really secure. The Orange County Board of Supervisors and the Registrar of Voters just came out today and said there will be zero tolerance for voter intimidation. They are going to protect the right to vote. It is, sacred in this country, and it is appalling how many places are not protecting that right to vote and, allowing voter suppression, allowing intimidation. We talk a lot about the Civil Rights Movement and the Voting Rights Act, not being protected by the Supreme Court. But honestly, when you look, yes, Jim Crow laws, yes, poll tax, yes, literacy tests, those were all incredibly restrictive and discriminatory. But the worst thing was that the day after voting day was lynching day, where anyone who had the audacity to vote as a Black man in the South would be lynched and serve as an example to anyone else. That kind of voter intimidation is more powerful than any kind of legal, tricks that you can play. That kind of voter intimidation that is going on by supporters of voter suppression is unacceptable and should be unacceptable to every single American. Protecting the right to vote has to be a sacred trust in this country. And so I'm really happy to live in a county and a state that takes that seriously. After the March 3rd primary, which, you know, kind of got shifted off, we didn't have a lot of time to dive into those numbers because, of course, the pandemic sent us all to our homes. But in looking at what happened, there were about 100,000 ballots that were not counted in the March 3rd primary. And when you look at them, they were not counted for good reasons. Number one, they arrived too late. You can't have illegitimate ballots be counted. The California state, about 20,000 arrived too late. The California legislature fixed that and said, okay, if 3 days after is not enough time for ballots to arrive, then we will extend that. And the rule now in the state of California is, as long as your ballot is postmarked, it has to go in the mail on November 3rd. You have 17 days. 17 days for a very slow post office to saunter over with your ballot. Now, voting early solves that. It will get there. And, the voter tracker. Oh my gosh, I forgot. We have a vote tracker I don't have the link here. I'm going to get it. So let me go get that. And I have to open up another thing and get that. California has a vote tracker where, just like Amazon will tell you where your package is at every moment of the day, we can track our ballots. And so you can sign up for Where's My Ballot at the Secretary of State's website, and you can track your ballot every moment of the day. And so you just sign up to where'smyballot.sos, that's Secretary of State.ca.gov for those of you who are watching on Facebook Live. Where's My Ballot, no abbreviation, no apostrophe. Where's My Ballot.sos.ca.gov. And you can track that ballot and make sure it is counted. So that's 20,000 arrive late. We've solved that problem, 17 days. And almost all the ballots arrive really, really, really quickly. You can also drop them in the drop box and they will absolutely be counted. And voting on the vote center, you get a receipt for your vote. So drop off the mail-in ballots. I'm reading the question in the chat. Yes, you can drop it off at the drop boxes. They are secure drop boxes that get picked up. But if you want to vote in person on voting day, you can also just drop it in the mail. I mean, this is the extended mail-in period, as long as it is postmarked by voting day, election day, November 3rd. You have 17 days for it to be counted. Now, I like to know that mine is counted. I vote super early. I've already done all my research. And so I vote the day that I get it. I sit my children down and make them vote with me because we no longer go to precincts and polling places. I proudly put my I have voted sticker on and put it all over social media. But I know that my ballot is already there and now I can track it, which is even more fun. But you can vote all the way up to November 3rd. The rest of the ballots weren't counted. And by the way, 100,000 sounds like a really scary number to not have counted, as less than 1% in the state of California. We had 7 million ballots. So that's a very small number. Most people voted correctly. But the 70,000 that didn't get counted that weren't late were not counted because people didn't sign their ballot. You can't just have ballots that aren't signed, or the signature didn't match. And so now with the tracking, we've solved that problem as well. If you turn in your ballot and it's not signed, we will contact you. Oh, well, we won't. I'm not going to contact you. Don't worry about that. But Neil Kelly, the registrar of voters, will contact you and say, do you want to verify this signature is yours? Sometimes people change signatures. Health problems can cause a signature change. Sometimes I make my J's different. I like that they're verifying my signature. I want them to verify it. I don't want there to be any concern about voter fraud. Voter fraud, as far as impersonation, is so ridiculously low, we shouldn't be talking about it. It's about how to get informed voters to vote. That's what we should be talking about. But this eliminates that question. And so if you forgot to sign, they will notify you and you can either void that ballot and vote again at a voting center, or you can sign your ballot that you already signed. If you go, oh, I don't want to research those 12 statewide ballot measures again, I already did that. It's the correct ballot. You can just visit and sign for that. So we've really done a great job of identifying the problems that happened in that trial run, that primary ballot in March, of what the problems were with an all mail-in election. And California is far ahead of a lot of other states. Orange County is far ahead of almost everybody. Really and truly. Neil Kelly should be cloned and sent to every single precinct in the country, because I would feel a lot better about voter integrity. But I'll keep him because he's amazing and great. Other questions, things that you don't understand that you want answered? Again, when in doubt, leave it blank. Vote local, get to know your local candidates. Local elections matter, they have consequences. Your city council are the people who hire your police chief. Your school board are the ones that make decisions about curriculum and reopening during a pandemic. Make sure that you get to know your candidates. Attend candidate forums when you can, ask questions. Get involved in local elections because they matter. Those people matter a lot.
Was there any new questions on the chat? I don't think there was, Jody. I think you answered everybody's. I just have one question. Oh, there was no more questions. I have a question. So how do you trace your ballot? If you put it in the mail, is there something on your ballot that you keep hold of a record? It's got a skew. Okay. Because I'm like, how the heck do they know when I mail it? So good to know. Good to know. Yeah, because I haven't gotten my vote by mail yet, but I will be looking forward to that.
Yeah, you'll see it on the ballot. On every page of it, it has a tracking device. So they are on it.
Wow. This is really a different election than the last couple of elections. I think they've really, like you said, been on it with the voter fraud and keeping track. And this is an eye-opener. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for all you did tonight. It might have been a low turnout, but I appreciate you always.
Any voter.
Any voter. That's who you've always been.
My neighbors always fear that I'm going to go door to door telling them about the proposition.
Well, I know you're super busy, and I appreciate everything. And I know that everybody's saying this was great. We appreciate it. It's up on Facebook Live. I appreciate your time, and you will hear from me soon enough.
Sure. Good. Okay.
See ya. Bye, everybody. Bye. Thank you for joining. It'll be on Facebook Live, and I'll send out links to it also.
Good.
Bye, Jody.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.